Hey guys, welcome to day 4 in our Unlocking the Bible reading plan. We're on Genesis 15. This is about the covenant that God made with Abraham. Now you can go back to Genesis 12 if you want to read where God first talked to Abraham about this. But it says here in chapter 15, God says, "Don't be afraid, Abraham, for I will protect you and I'll be your reward." And Abraham said, "Well, wait, how is this going to happen when I don't even have a son?" Here's what he's talking about. The covenant from Genesis 12 was about 3 things. God made these promises: a promised land, promised people, and then a promised blessing on all nations through Abraham. So this is what Abraham is complaining about in Genesis chapter 15. In fact, this is the framework for really understanding the entire Old Testament, even the New Testament. Basically, Abraham is saying this: how will this happen without a son? How am I supposed to have this great nation that comes from me, the promised people, who later on would become the Israelites, the Jewish nation? How are we supposed to have a promised land if I don't even have a son in the first place? And then, by the way, he says, and what's this third one really all about? Now, we're going to unpack all of this as we continue to read our Unlocking the Bible series. But for now, let's go back in chapter 15. God's response to Abraham, he says, "Look up into the sky, count the stars if you can, and that's how many descendants you'll have." And I love this in verse 6. It says, "Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith." Here's what I want you to pay attention to as you read this chapter. Nothing had happened yet. That's why it took faith. God had simply said in Genesis 12 all these things would happen, and nothing had happened yet. And it had been years that had passed. Now, this concept of being justified by faith will come up again and again in the New Testament. So we'll come back to this once we get into the New Testament later on in the plan. But for right now, I want you to see this theme right here in the 15th chapter of the Bible, the theme of believing in God and being called righteous because of your faith, not because of his works, but because of his faith. And one more thing here, as you read down in verse 17, God does this strange ritual with Abram. It turns out this is all a ritual from back in the day. Abraham saw a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch pass between 2 halves of carcasses, and the Lord made a covenant that day with Abraham. Now the point is this: Abraham slept through all of this whole ceremony. This was like a sort of like the covenant ceremony, and God alone was on the hook for these promises. Abraham slept through it all, and this fire pot and the flaming torch, those were symbols, those were representative of God's presence. Fire always represents God's presence in the Bible. And so even though you might read this and not think anything of it, this chapter is really important for understanding this major theme in the Bible. God makes a covenant with people, and God himself will see to it that this covenant is fulfilled.